Luke chapter 11, which says, one day Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples. He said to them, when you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone who sins against us. And lead us not into temptation. I got to serve a church, a Presbyterian church, a thriving Presbyterian church in Texas. Plano, Texas, suburb of Dallas to be exact. And it was a wonderful group of people. In fact, I found the Texans to be really nice folks, even though a lot of them in our church were from the Bay Area. And wonderful food and scary weather. But what is Texas most famous for? Oil. Beef. Barbecue. Pig. Yes, pig, yes. When you're there, spending any time in Texas, football comes up. Football. Our son, of course, he was in junior high and he had to play football. Why? Because, well, what else do you do when you're a junior high or in Texas? In fact, he played in 10,000-seat stadiums in junior high school. Well, they have a custom in Texas. Apparently, it's in every high school. It was at least back then, that the team captain leads the team in the Lord's Prayer before a game. And now, mind you, they don't have a big screen up for the students to be able to, read off what the Lord's Prayer is. Apparently in Texas, you learn the Lord's Prayer before you learn your X's and O's. I mean, they are really, really into football, and they're really into the Lord's Prayer. Because why not? Every team wants God to be on their side, right? And when they lose, well, I guess God had other things to do that night, and we'll come back on them. But I want to add that in 40-plus years of serving Presbyterian churches, I have never led one, not even one, that didn't pray the Lord's Prayer in every single worship service that they had. Not one. In fact, Martha and I planted a new church in a new community in Southern California, and we wanted to start in the mid-90s a totally contemporary church that didn't look or sound Presbyterian. We thought that would be really cool because nobody in that town seemed to be Presbyterian anyway. So we did, and most of the folks that we gathered initially were not Presbyterian. And we had no liturgy in there. It was preach the word and pray and sing praise songs and go home. Guess what they all missed? Guess what the thing they wanted to put in more than anything in a worship service? The Lord's Prayer. Yes. I was just amazed. If any mistake that I made in those years, it was not putting the Lord's Prayer in. And I think I went 1 week without the Lord's Prayer in that whole time. That's how serious it is. Now, Jesus didn't grow up with what we know as the Lord's Prayer. He did not play football from all we could tell. And he didn't have the Lord's Prayer in his day. Jesus grew up reciting something called the Jesus Creed that we mentioned at the start of our service. Love the Lord your God with all your being and your neighbor as yourself. And then this creed was just shaping him and molding him. So where did Jesus get his famous prayer that every Texas student football player has to learn before they can play ball? Where did he get that from? Well, he took a popular Jewish prayer of his day and modified it to fit his own creed, the one that I just mentioned. That prayer that he modified was called the Kaddish. And it went like this. Okay, on the left on this slide is the Kaddish of Judaism. This is the one that Jesus took. This is the one that was fairly popular in his day. And then he modified it, and the one that he modified it is on the right. So, magnified and sanctified, that on the left, be his great name in the world he created according to his will. May he establish his kingdom during your life and during your days and during the life of all the house of Israel, speedily and in the near future. And say amen. That was the prayer that Jesus took. Now, notice how he modifies it then. First off, he starts off by saying, Our Father. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Abba was an informal reference to a father, like we say daddy. Then he added 3 lines, those on the right, that you know well, asking for bread, forgiveness, and help against temptation. These 3 additional lines shifted the prayer from you to us. And as a result of these changes, the Lord's Prayer really has 2 parts. The you petitions that talk about God, and the we us petitions that concern others. Now, can you see what Jesus did with the original Jewish prayer? He added a concern for others. The Lord's Prayer is an ancient Jewish prayer that morphed into prayer of love of God and love of others in order to fit his creed of loving God and loving others with all of our being, our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. We love God and we love others. Now let's talk about this little word that he starts this prayer with, that he radically adds to this very well-known Jewish prayer, Abba. He chose to start every one of his prayers with this term, Abba, our Father, except for one prayer. One prayer. That one prayer was when he was on the cross. You remember what he prayed? My God, why have you forsaken me? Most dramatic moment in his life. I like how Scott McKnight says in his book, The Jesus Creed, that in choosing the term Abba, or Father, he chose a term from the home, because the home is where a father and a mother were meant to dwell. It's where we first learn, or are deprived of learning, of love. I've heard that in our first 6 months of living, we learn whether we trust our parents or not, depending on how they respond to our needs. And whether they pick us up, whether they comfort us, whether they hold us. It's also where our first understandings of God begin, and that understanding is transferred from both parents to God. It's a really crucial time. And when we have troubles loving others, the culprit is usually rust. Now, rust. I like old cars. I really like old cars. And when I have time to kill, which isn't a whole lot, but a little more these days, I will turn on one of those car shows on television. And some of my favorites are the YouTube episodes where they go into a junkyard and they see if they can get the car running on that episode. Oh yes, that just really gets my juices going. And usually the reason they can't get them running is because rust has sealed the engine shut. It can't turn over any longer. Rust is a huge problem. It rusts shut. And that's what actually happens in time. Our emotional heart, we have this great ability to feel, and this great ability to sense what's going on around us and stuff. It's called emotions. Those begin to rust shut. And partially because of the way our parents loved us, part of it is the experiences that we've had in our life. And rest can be overcome. In my workshop in the backyard, I've made a little museum to my dad. My dad was one of those guys who could fix anything. So anything broke at home, just, Dad, would you go fix it, kind of thing. Really cool. Unfortunately, I did not inherit that gene. But I made this little museum. It's just a little section of my workshop in the back with some of the most important things in his workshop. And there's a little bronze can with a little tube off the top of it. It's an oil can. I never saw him fill that oil can. I saw him use that oil can all the time, and when my lawnmowers wouldn't work when I was a kid, he would use that oil can and it was like magic. I don't know what it is, so it's kind of like having a piece of my dad there. This oil can. Oil has a way of penetrating and making things work. And what we need then is the oil of Abba's love to penetrate through our rusty heart openings and help us love again. I have a story from McKnight's book of Wesley Nelson. He was young and he realized that his mother had left him for just a little while. But you know, when you're little, what's a little while? They have no idea of knowing whether you're going to come back in a half an hour or half a week kind of thing. He suddenly realized his mother was gone and he started crying his eyes out. He didn't know where she was. And his father grew tired of the crying. Just being a bad dad, said, "Mother is gone. She's gone. She's tired of your yelling. Stop yelling. She's left for good. She'll never come back." Well, what do you think that did to him? It made him cry even louder. It's bad. Well, Wesley's mother did return. And she took him back into her arms and comforted her as she always had done before. But he said that act of love was blotted out from his memory. Do you know what he remembered? What his father had said about how his mom was never coming back. That made such an impression on him that his brain had to make it come true. He said his emotional ties were broken and his mother's love and care were no longer a memory to her. It caused him to, in essence, to cry for her for 50 years. He needed some work after that. Wesley's perception of God as a loving God, as a loving Abba, as a loving father, was distorted by some cruel, mistimed words from his father. If being spiritually formed involves loving God, that formation can begin only if we're able to receive Abba's unconditional love for us. And so when that love gets distorted, like Wesley's view of God's love, we transfer our love to something else, like machines, like careers, like sports, or like something else, whatever. We're very creative people. We find all kinds of things to do that. And relationships, even if those relationships aren't very helpful. My wife was a pastor for 15 years or so, and she saw this happening over and over and over again. And she said, these folks, they need more than just what I can give them on Sunday morning standing up in a pulpit. They need to get healed of their past, because to love God, they've got to deal with the crud that happened back there in their past. And so she went back to school and she dedicated herself to working on that. And so for 5 days a week, she works on that, and then some pastors take them from there on Sunday mornings and try to give them the love of God, and hopefully they're able to receive that. See, Jesus regularly encountered people who said they loved God. They really said that, and they looked sincere about it. And they probably were, in their heart, somewhat sincere. But their actions revealed they had never received God's love themselves. They were people who complained that Jesus was wasting time with people outside of the church, or in those days, outside of the synagogue. They looked at those folks as, oh, those are the sinful ones. And he thought that they thought he should spend more time with the people inside, the good church people. But living out the Jesus Creed led Jesus to do what no other religious leader would think of doing at the expense of his reputation, and that is spend time with outsiders. It was living out the Jesus Creed that caused him to do that. And that's what actually got him into trouble the most. Now, you remember the prodigal son story, right? Hopefully there's nobody here who hasn't heard the great prodigal son story in Luke chapter 15. Jesus told that story about a father who had two sons as a way to put the Jesus Creed into story form. And you may never have seen the prodigal son story as being a part of the Jesus Creed, but it was. Stop for just a moment. Take a deep breath. We're going to go into the prodigal son story. Are you ready? Okay, you know the story very well. Younger son, he wants a share of his estate so he could go venture off and do what he wanted. He wanted to go off and invest it, become his own millionaire. Yep. And surprisingly, always to me, is why did the dad do it? I mean, my kids know what they're going to get, but they know they're not going to get it until the old man's gone, okay? So, I don't know why he did it, but he did it anyway. And he heads off to Vegas. Well, okay, not Vegas, but an equivalent of Vegas. You got to picture it. Eventually, of course, all his money's run out. And he's reduced to cleaning out the dumpsters behind the casinos, looking for something to eat. And he sees a cleaning crew come along, and they're cleaning out the dumpsters professionally, you know, all that kind of stuff. They're emptying them and cleaning them out and so forth. And he thinks, I remember my dad hired a cleaning crew to clean the dumpsters. I could do that for him. He would pay me to do it. Even the little bit that they're making cleaning these dumpsters would be better than what I've got right now. So I'm going to head out. So he heads home, and now, you know, at this point, the father has two choices. And you know what those two choices are. He could turn his back on his son. Anybody ever have to do that? That must be really tough. Or welcome him home. If he welcomes him home, now there's a danger there. He might be supporting this guy's bad habits. Welcoming home, you might be a codependent. I remember this member that I had who had a son who just kept taking him and taking him and taking him and taking him. And I remember we went for a ride one day and he said, I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it. I've got to cut him off. And this is the hardest thing. And this is a pilot and a really tough guy. And he's in tears. I've got to cut him off. It's painful. But if he welcomes him home, and he welcomes him, he might be supporting the habit, but he also might risk turning the other son off to him. Have to deal with jealousy. Now, this is what we call a dilemma, right? It's one of those rubber meets the road kind of dilemmas. What would living the Jesus Creed tell the father to do? Remember, this is why I believe Jesus told the story, was to illustrate the Jesus Creed. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now let's picture the father seeing his son lumbering down Main Street in Antigua with a shopping cart. His stuff is all in the shopping cart. His clothes are dirty. He's got a bunch of old things in that shopping cart. His hair is long and dirty. He smells. And the father's pretty certain that the son has blown through about $50,000. $50,000 or more of his own hard-earned money. I don't know about you, but if my son burned through $50,000 of money, if I had that much money, I would not be happy, really not happy. But here he is, and if you're the father, you might think he's coming back to talk to you out of more money. Dad, I'm just on the verge, give me another couple $1,000 and all this goes away. Yeah, that's what he might be thinking. And you might look at him, hey, he's a mess. He's not one of us anymore. What am I going to do? What would the Jesus Creed tell the Father to do? Now, if you've heard this story before, you know what he does. The Father runs out to meet the Son. Now run. Why does he run to go out there? Specifically says that he runs. There's a reason. The Father would have known a custom in those days of whenever a son disgraced his father through some bad behaviors, some sinful behaviors, he runs away and then later returns. The elders of the city are to take the young man to the village center. This is bizarre, but they break a pot in front of him at his feet. And that was a sign that he is now banished from the village and he can never come back again. That was their custom. So now, by running to his son, scholars think the father was trying to prevent his son from being banished from the village. Because once the village banned you, it didn't matter who you were or what you were. That's passionate love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Now, this heart represents the seat of our emotions. It's what produces energy. It's what got you up this morning on a Sunday morning. When you have to get up every other morning and you have to go do this and this, this is what got you up, was the heart. It's what produces energy. Love for his son is what would give his father energy to run to his son. He could say all that he wanted about how he loved his son, that he would do anything for his son, that his sons were the most important people in his life. But if there was no passionate energy exerted toward him, it would all be revealed as a great big lie. Because your mouth, you can say whatever you want to say. Now think about who Jesus was telling this story to. Think about this. It was to a group of religious leaders who claimed the first part of the creed. Remember, we talked about this last week. The Kaddish was this, the Shema rather, was this prayer that they prayed all the time, and that was loving the Lord your God with all your being. And they would claim to love God with all their being. They would do all these ceremonial things to show they were obeying God, obeying the law, but have absolutely no passionate energy, none whatsoever for anyone else. That was it. And we've all seen this in churches from time to time. Folks that are so eager to be in church thinking that by doing so they're loving God. But then gossiping about so-and-so over there. Did you hear what so-and-so did? Or ignoring those in need whom they are fully capable of helping. Like the children that will come to our church, helping them to learn about Jesus. Yeah, you could do something. You could actually do something with what you've got. Yeah. Well, rather than hitting people over the head with a bunch of shoulds, you should be doing this and this and this, about loving people, we need to acknowledge we can only love if we've been loved. A lot of people have a hard time loving God or anyone else because they can't remember being loved themselves. Ever been criticized? Ever been ignored? Ever been laughed at? You tried and tried and tried. You did your very best and you're so proud of the work that you did. And what do you get in return? That's all you got done? That's it? Yeah. Never been loved? And church, unfortunately, to many seems like a bunch of boring rules and judgmental people. But following Christ is about a loving relationship with an Abba, Daddy, who won't criticize us needlessly. And this is what I found about MPC in 3 weeks of being here. You seem to love one another. You seem, I know this is honeymoon period, but you're very lax people. And when it comes to being critical. And I hope that every one of you who are here today in this location, that you are experiencing encouragement, that you're experiencing love, that your being here, just your being here, bringing music, bringing a smile, bringing your name, bringing your presence, is having an impact on somebody else. And what if you don't like what somebody else is doing in the church? Maybe it's not up to your standard. What can you do? What do you do with that? The Jesus Creed would say you love them and you be straightforward with them. And let me just give you a word of encouragement about this. When you find something that needs improvement, maybe in the building, maybe in the worship service, maybe in the sermon, don't just say that, but go to the person and say, I love you very much. I like what you're doing. I am so grateful that you are here and doing this. And then, you know what? Then you can tell them, okay, I'm having a problem with this. Can you help me with this? And try to see it from their point of view. Loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor starts with allowing God's love to soak into you.